Hello, Steve Slack here, and welcome to this, my second building blocks tutorial about loops. Okay, so to start with, we're going to look at our normal interface again. In our control section, there's three loops that Sense uses. There's the forever loop, the repeat with a number loop, and the repeat until loop. Loops are used in programming to run code a multiple number of times, and as you can see, what we do with Sense is we put the code that we need to use inside the loop's arms, so to speak. So all that code will be repeated. This code will be repeated 10 times, and obviously there's no code in there to repeat. Okay, so how do they work? Well, if you look at our loop itself, the structure, you'll see obviously there's the arms that encompass the code that needs to run, but in the bottom arm there's a little, what looks like an enter key arrow, but it's actually the opposite way around to your enter key. Your enter key points left and this points up, and basically what this is saying to the program is once you get to this point here at the end of the code, go back up to the top. Now in Sense blocks you'll see that there's the links, like little Lego links that link pieces of code together, and as you can see, the repeat pieces of code both have links top and bottom to link into other pieces of code, but the forever loop doesn't. The forever has just a top link so that it can be called or used by the code, but it doesn't have a bottom link, so it doesn't do anything after. So we're to assume that whenever we run forever, we're running it forever and not just until something else happens. Now, as a brief aside, there's been mention in the forums of a forever if loop. Now, forever if is basically from the original Sense program that Sense was drawn from, which is Scratch, and it was dropped because, well, I think the main reason is because you can't have a forever if. It's either forever or it is not. So it's a conditional forever. Doesn't really work in my mind, but we've dropped it, or the OU have dropped it for Sense, and it's a good idea in my opinion. Forever loops run things forever, so I guess you can guess what we're going to do now. Yep, we're going to turn our sprite by 15 degrees. And there we go. When we run the forever loop, as we know, we can double click inside this window to run a loop like that, or run any sort of code that's in here. We can see that it's turning, and it's turning constantly, and it's doing that because we've requested it to do it forever. Now, sometimes you'll use, instead of using numbers in these areas, you'll actually use a variable. So I'm going to create a quick variable here. I'm going to call it turn. Yep, there's me, logical again with my choices. And as you can see at the moment, turn is set to 0. Now we can actually drag that into the count, and as you can see, as soon as we drag it in the forever box, even though that is looping forever, it stops turning because it's got a value of 0. So if we then bring a change turn and change it by 1, we see that it starts turning. Turn has a value of 1. It's turning more quickly. Do that a couple more times until it gets up to 10. You see that turn has a value of 10. It's still called in our forever loop, and the thing is turning more quickly. So if we were to change that by, say, 200 with extreme, but there we go, you'll see that the Sense really flies along. So it's obvious that when we change these variables within here, we actually change what's happening within the loop. So the loop runs forever, but it does have a few conditions that we can change by changing variables elsewhere. And this variable can be changed if it's global in other sprites, in other parts of the program, and still affect how our Sense spins. So that's how a loop works in Sense. Goes through all the code, and any changes that happen to that code while it's going through, because it goes through each time, it changes accordingly. Okay, and this is true of all of our codes, all of our tries again. And this is true of all of our loops. As you can see with repeat 10, we can do a repeat 10 on it, but it still turns by 200, so it still turns really quickly, but just 10 times. We can increase that number to 200 and run it, and as you can see, it turns 200 times. And run it, and you see it went 10 turns and hid, and that's what we wanted it to do. And as you see, it carries on the code afterwards, so it doesn't stop at the end, whereas the forever one does. The forever one will only stop when you stop your script running. It's good for things like if you wanted to have, if you were writing a word processor and you wanted to say every time someone presses the enter key, start a new line, then you could put that code in there and leave that running while ever the program's running, forever in effect. The final loop method is the repeat until, and this is a conditional repeat. Basically, we give it something to achieve or some sort of input it needs. We've done key inputs before, so we're just going to do a space input here. And what we're saying now is repeat this code in here, this block here, by going down to there and back up until the space key is pressed. And that condition will stop the script running. And that is just like we've finished our number of runs in a repeat, and it'll carry on to the next piece of code. So let's just put that up there. Repeat until key space pressed, turn degrees. I'm going to change turn down to our normal 15 now. Okay, so we set our sense turn at 15, so it's 15 degrees again, our old favourite. And this time when we click the green flag, as you see, everything gets whited out and we know that it's running, and it's turning just as it did in the other loops. The only difference now is when I press the space key, it stops turning, and nothing we do now will start that piece of code working again until the green flag is clicked. So as you can see, it's a run once only situation. So in this particular type of loop, we keep repeating until the condition that we've set is reached. Now that could be a space key press, it could be any condition that can be created can be used to stop a loop running. Okay, so that's tutorial 2 completed, and that's looking at loops, and our next tutorial, tutorial 3, will be looking at conditions.